There we go. All right. Morning, everyone. This is the November 1st, 2024 meeting of the Building Energy Code Working Group. I am Representative Scott Campbell. Senator Bray is home sick today. So I will be trying to fill his large shoes.
Sure. I'm happy to participate, but remotely.
Okay. All right. I think we have a quorum here. Oh, Kelly wanted to check to be sure that we have members of the working group or their appointees, delegates on hand for the vote later in the meeting. We're going to vote on accepting the report. So first we will do approval of the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? Are there any comments? Amendments? Anything?
Since I'm
Motion.
motion, I can make the motion. I would move approval of the minutes of the last meeting.
The Bray makes a motion. We need a second for that? Second. The second from Peter Tucker. All in favor of accepting the minutes? Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Minutes are accepted. Thank you. All right, so next we were going to have a vote on the draft recommendations that were circulated by Zach. We've had a number of written requests or amendments to those recommendations, but we have 90 minutes set aside for discussion about this. And I think Richard was going to start with the conversation.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
so just review this.
Just talk to Rachel
Just
the other
make sure
day.
we're all
Oh, sure.
on the same page here.
Does, so yeah, so that's the first item on the agenda. After that, we hope to discuss draft report sections and details. Zach Tyler will lead that conversation. Next, discussing the next steps to finalizing this year's report. And following that, a timeline and schedule for next year's meeting of this working group, this being a 2-year working group. And following that, stakeholder and public comments.
Might I just ask a quick question?
Yes,
Richard Wabi, I believe all these recommendations are important, whether we agree with them or not. They're opinions from the field and from those people that attended and contributed. Would it be just as wise for us in some aspect to include those recommendations within the report as they were given to us in, say, an appendix to that report, or just an opinion center?
do you mean the other organizations' recommendations to amend the report? Is that what you're referring
To add a section within the report
Yeah,
that include or is inclusive of each of those
Other-
sets of recommendations.
well, I think that's something we will talk about during this next part of the meeting, where we discuss all those recommendations and their place in the report.
But what I'm saying is I may not like his recommendation,
Yeah,
right? And I may be able to muster enough votes around the table to say, no, we don't like your recommendation. And I'm saying it's important that the legislative body
Yeah.
understand all the input
yeah,
that we got
yeah,
to end up there.
yes,
And without the inclusion of those recommendations as written within the back of the report, could be nothing more than opinions or however you want to word it. Without that inclusion, they will never understand the process and the divergence
right,
that we went in.
yeah. I understand. I hear your point.
I just want to make a small clarification and make sure everyone's aware that unlike last year, this report is not being submitted to the General Assembly. It's only being submitted to the Senate Natural Resources Committee and the House Natural Resources Committee. So I just wanted to make that clear because you said all the legislators knowing and it doesn't.
I met.
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone was clear.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Hear your point, Richard, thank you. Peter.
So, yeah, so I mean, but the basis of this report will lead to legislation in this upcoming session?
It might, that might be part of the recommendations.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Because that would go to the general assembly, but,
right.
legislation was proposed.
Yeah.
And Richard, you're saying like a minority opinion on positions?
I'm saying
that it was not unanimous?
you wrote something, I wrote something, he wrote something. That should all be considered body of this report.
Yeah, but we want to make the report something that is digestible and understandable too. So there are some conflicting points that people made that would, I think, just add confusion to if we include.
Well, no, it doesn't
So-
add confusion, it
but-
adds inclusion
Let's
of everybody.
let's see how the conversation goes. Quickly.
Quick, guys. I have a general question and thought about the use of dissenting opinions in the report. When I reviewed last year's report, I noticed a lot of dissenting opinions, and to me, that weakens the report. And so I was going to ask, actually, maybe the legislators here who have more experience with receiving these reports for all sorts of different issues. When you receive a report, do more dissenting opinions weaken it? And if so, should we be trying to come to a compromise if there are two different opinions, rather than include both of them and say some people thought this, some people thought this? Would it be better to come to a compromise so that we can minimize the dissenting opinions?
Well, ultimately, that would be the.
Yes.
So, but we should keep on going here. And Kelly, you wanted to make sure that we had representatives of each of the organizations that is part of the working group to start with. You want to?
Yeah, I don't see anyone from the LCT right now, because Ted was not able to be here, so I don't. I'll just have to interrupt if they get on to clarify that they're representative. Thank you.
All right, good.
Before we
Yes.
move on, just, since there's already a pretty interesting discussion going, I think we balanced that last year. We tried to come to a consensus as much as possible so that it was readable and suggested a course of action. And we didn't cut anybody out. So we had appendices that allowed us to pass along some of the complexity that didn't allow us to have just a single voice in the final report. And I'm guessing we'll navigate it. And I thought it was a successful balance between the two. I'm guessing we'll figure that out again today.
I hope we'll figure that out in the next 90 minutes. Any further comments on the agenda? Are we all set with that?
I'm sorry, can I, one more?
One more from Kelly.
Can the person who joined from Twin Pines, please introduce yourself with your name? It just says Twin Pines, and so I want to capture it for the minutes, please.
Yep, I'm John Rodenberg, co-owner of Twin Pines. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. So now we will turn it over to Richard.
Okay, thank you. Certainly, if we can arrive at consensus, that would be a great outcome. Attempt to strive for that. So I'm just in terms of logistics here, we had sent out a draft of the recommendations a week ago. Yes, I think a week ago. And then that shifted a little bit. We did a little bit of reorganizing, and most of them are the same. We moved one from charge 3 to charge 2 and added a bullet or two. So, and then that updated set of recommendations table was included in the draft that went out on Monday, the 1028 version. So the version that I have here on the screen that I'm sharing is the 1028 version. And so subsequently, thank you for those of you, a number of you who took the time to review this and provided feedback and recommendations, most appreciated. We thought that the cleanest way to go through this would be to just sort of walk one recommendation at a time, and instead of trying to pull in the 4 different versions and word tweaks and suggestions, if we can start from the clean table 1, and if you're advocating for a change to that recommendation, bring that up as part of the discussion here, recognizing we've got, what'd you say, Zach, 12 recommendations?
11 recommendations.
11 recommendations. We've got 90 minutes, so we're going to try to move through them. So, let's try to keep some of these hopefully will be relatively easy, but try to minimize the time, just knowing that we've got 11 to walk through. So, and so I think the best process here would be to just focus on each recommendation, and any suggestions, discussions, bring them up. Hopefully we can come to consensus. If there are any dissenters, I just want to get this process right. If there are any dissenters, then I think it'd be useful for us to note that as we move through each one. I'm going to presume that there is majority consensus around a recommendation, except unless you indicate that you're a dissenter. We tried last year to do voting, and it was a little unclear how that would work. So I think the presumption is that there is consensus support for the recommendation, or if we can talk through those changes, we'll presume that there is support for that. But if you feel otherwise, we'll try to indicate who those dissenters are with each recommendation. Does that process feel right? Does that sound about right? I see some head nodding. Okay. So starting at the top, 1.1, let's put this on the table. Support OPR with the rulemaking process to establish voluntary specialty certifications for residential contractors that are registered in the OPR contractor registry. And so the next steps following that recommendation would be to stand up an ARBI's training and exam process, voluntary. Is the presumption, this is the operating indication here. Stand up further training and exam certifications in building science and OSHA. All these 3 ARBI's, building science and OSHA, come out of the Act 182, or Jennifer can correct me there, and respond to inquiries from OPR. Jen, you've got your hand up.
Yep, thank you. OSHA and our building energy were requirements of Act 182, not the building science.
Thank you.
But one thing one change I wanted to suggest, Richard, is where it says exam certifications, I would change that to say, and requirements for certifications, because of that, we're still looking at whether an exam is going to be part of the necessary qualifications.
For both of these then, is that right?
And OSHA doesn't do exams.
We did
Certification.
have that discussion previously. Who's gonna perform the exams?
That's
Go ahead. Go ahead, Jen.
well, I was just going to say that's what OPR is looking at right now. So we're trying to figure out for ARBI's whether we want to have an exam and whether that should be a required component. And if so, are we going to designate a specific exam, or are we going to leave that up to course providers? So
Does that wording look like what you were suggesting?
yes, thank you.
Okay, let's push along.
Okay, and Sandy? Oh,
We're considering a group of 1 charges, or 1 recommendations, is that correct?
we're looking at 1.1.
Yeah. VDRA would actually like to move things around, well, keep it, whatever, add one charge to this group. We could discuss that after, Colin and Jim can bring that up. After you discuss these five, we had actually suggested it at the top.
So let's focus on the recommendations that we have on the table. And after we get through, if we can get through all those in our allotted time, then and there's enough time, then we can bring up additional charges.
That's a really critical one. So
Okay, but the challenge here is that we want to make sure that we cover what the working group has discussed and not add anything new, with the recognition that we have next year as well. I mean, it's the 2-year working group, so understood that. But it feels like it's late to bring up
It's
new.
not new, it's brought up.
It was brought up, okay. But if we can go through the recommendations and then bring,
You're saying go through all
All
three
of it.
charges?
yeah,
And then bring up big ones.
yeah,
I think that's going to be a better way of doing this, yeah, so
okay.
let's go.
Any dissenters?
Well, excuse me, I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand by Zoom, but can I make a comment?
Madam
Yes.
Sharp, yes.
I know you merged all the cells here for responsible entity, and I wonder if there's some clarity we could put to who the responsible entity is when we know it, versus supporting roles. And it feels like, you know, this responsible entity here could be OPR, but there's also ICC might be the responsible entity for that exam, you know, RB's training and certification process. If we know if we can differentiate it all, I think that'd be helpful.
Good point. Sorry, I should have indicated that we should look at all of the items in each row. So is that okay, Jen, to just
Yes.
list OPR
Yes.
on this one?
Thank you.
Okay.
So in terms of dissent, BVRA dissent. Sent the text last night to me.
Okay. The dissenting language.
BVRA does not support further certification efforts under OPR. We would like to add a recommendation to move contractor certification, fire safety in this year, to follow with me next year.
Okay, so that language would be in the body of the report. I think for clarity in the table, we'll just list the dissenting organizations.
We're gonna hope that it gets added.
Oh, yeah, no, we certainly will add your dissenting language, but that we can, and each dissenting organization is free to provide your specific language, and we'll put that in the body of the paper.
Is that how you want to do this today? We go through and when somebody wants to dissent, they do it now?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sorry,
That's okay.
okay,
So the responses and the comments that fire safety put forward were based on what was submitted here in this draft report. So I just want to raise a flag to the continuation of adding on additional things outside the realm of this without, I want to make sure we have ample time to put an opinion in on this. And this is what happened last year. I'm not trying to be critical here. I'm just saying, this is what we're looking at. This is the draft report. I provided comments based on what is in this report,
Mhm.
Right.
not additional stuff. So I just,
Can I just ask a clarifying question? I just want to be clear, but are you saying that, so what we did last time was, like we've shown here, there was a dissenter, and then the dissenter could put their comments, brief comments in. Are you saying you would want an opportunity to comment on the dissenting opinion?
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
right.
I just wanted to make sure I
If
was
this
clear about what
report
he's
is gonna
saying.
change.
He's saying if you're gonna add, because that's like an additional recommendation from someone else, and that he would want to be able to respond
Here's
to
the
that.
comment on chart.
so I'll maybe just to provide some clarity on opportunity for further input as well too. Our plan, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, our plan is to take what comes out of today's discussion, update the full report and circulate that to everybody next month, Tuesday, early next week.
Do you want to put a date on that?
Well, we do have a date on it.
What we had discussed was allowing for comments on this draft until next Wednesday, close of business. If we want to incorporate revisions from today, I think we could try and circulate those. We could try to get those out on Monday, and people would have until Wednesday to provide.
And then is this group gonna then vote on that particular report? I mean, I guess I'm confused, Doc, so what,
So,
I thought we were in here today to look at this.
Look at this,
Content is and vote on this.
Right, we are. That's the goal.
correct. It would just be like you said, getting an opportunity though, if someone wanted to comment on a dissenting opinion, that you would have that opportunity, but we're not adding stuff at that point.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I guess we have a short time window
Yeah.
here, and I'm concerned about sort of throwing it open to an iterative process of
No.
somebody's making a dissent and a proposal, and then others have responses to that, and then others have responses to those responses, and
Yeah.
so we don't have time for that. So I think what we have to do here is, and I know Senator Bray wants to chime in, we have to stay focused on the draft that's on the screen right now, that's in front of us, that EFG circulated on the 28th, is that correct?
Yep.
And that is what we will be voting on. We're making minor wording amendments now, or edits, but we're not going to be editing the substance of the report. I think is what our goal is right now. And if there are dissents or disagreements from members of the working group, then we should capture those in the draft that, Zach, you say you'll be able to send out with dissenting comments on Monday?
So we were asking, let me lay out the timeline.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think the draft that we are discussing today, Richard can make some comments to the recommendations as he's doing now, as we go through. We can circulate that, I would say, just on this summary table. I don't think we want to get into marking up any of the body. We'll circulate that after the meeting today. We will be asking for dissenting comments and any additional clarifications to the recommendations by close of business next Wednesday. We will then incorporate all those dissenting comments and any clarifications to the text. We will circulate that by the end of next week, and then the group would have that puts us at the 8th. I believe we had talked about then allowing the group until the 13th for any final comments or approval, and then this will go out on the 15th.
Are we gonna have?
So we are really
are we
voting
gonna-
on the final draft.
Just 1 second, please, Richard. So are we gonna vote sort of remotely or by email on the final?
I think the vote is really today, and what we would send out on the 13th is really just
Incorporating dissenting comments.
incorporating dissenting comments and a chance for a last set of eyes, but it really wouldn't be to raise
Okay.
new material,
No
new
new
content,
things.
new issues.
Corrections,
Yes,
like,
exactly.
not,
Make sure your comments that you provided on your dissenting opinion are accurately captured,
Right.
essentially.
Okay. Does everyone understand that?
Just a quick clarifying question.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about legislative committees, but for a meeting law, typically we can't make any decisions by email. So we're not supposed to make any decisions by, or does that not apply to this?
Oh, no, I think it does apply. I think we're in open meeting law.
I don't mean just for report, I mean.
Yeah.
right, we can't vote
Right.
via, correct, right?
Yes, that's entirely correct. Thank you, Chris. Pardon me.
Okay.
All right, so let's push along here, because we're only through the 1.1.
Or 1.1, but we understand, but hopefully we understand that the process now.
Who's the RBA? Sorry, it wasn't in the glossary.
Builders and Remodelers Association. Vermont Builders and Vermont Association. Okay, so
Okay, here we go.
Okay, 1.2. Support OPR for website improvements. That would include ad filtering capability, for instance, service territory, specialties certifications, OPR being the responsible party, funding source yet to be identified.
do have a comment from OPR.
Yeah.
Jennifer.
Thank you. I did some internal, had some internal discussions about this, and my requested change would be, instead of ad filtering capability, OPR would investigate the feasibility of adding filtering capability. And I'm happy to explain that. I understand we're on a tight timeline today, so if anybody wants me to do that, I will, but we need the opportunity to figure out what it's going to take in terms of IT support and resources. And it may be more significant than one might think.
That's reasonable.
The possibility, is that the word you used?
I said feasibility.
Feasibility, okay.
That seems reasonable to me.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, any dissenters? Great, thank you for your willingness to do that, Jen. 1.3, work with lenders, attorneys, real estate professionals, and home inspectors to include acknowledgement of RBs in the residential real estate transaction process. This would entail coordinate with real estate groups to establish a process for integrating RBs into real estate transactions, develop targeted training and education materials for these market actors, responsible parties being EFG, Energy Futures Group, Efficiency Vermont, and this would be funded through EFG's DOE grant. Any comments?
What does integrating mean? Or what do you envision integrating?
Closing checklists, potentially incorporating RBs.
For new
What do you mean
construction?
by incorporating? I mean, what's the goal here? You know, I mean, you know, and I think the real estate, you know, our industry should be, you know, one of the entities.
Yeah, so certainly, happy, you know, we should.
But I don't understand what you're asking us to do.
Integrate, well, I guess look for opportunities to ensure that the RB's certificate is recognized in new construction real estate process. So I don't, integrate is a pretty broad term as you're raising.
That's what I'm asking.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I think, you know, so we deal mostly with already built homes.
Existing.
You know, some that would have RVs from 2000 or, you know, whatever. You know, that's usually an attachment to a listing that is available. Is that what you mean by integrating or? And then I think you have to look at new construction kind of almost as a separate issue because we deal with only a small percentage of that.
I mean, I think it's having this discussion and figuring out where are there opportunities. I know we did this for a number of years ago on, there's a disclosure form that happens with realtors to, and the transaction for buyers for existing homes about what programs are available and whatnot. But this, given that this is primarily focused on new construction, I don't know that that we sort of looked at your materials and is there an opportunity to make sure that buyers are aware and the builders are aware of RVs in that transaction.
Maybe it's just asking the question. If you're reselling a building that was built in the last 10 or 20 years or something, and there was an RV certificate, just looking for it, checking.
Right. I mean, the education piece, I think, is important, you know, for our industry.
Right. So just asking the question, I think, is probably the thing that would apply for sales of existing homes.
Gotcha. And I wouldn't, now at this point, I wouldn't say we're a responsible party.
But you're not.
Because,
Okay.
you know, really, you know, your work's got to be with the building industry.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, I'm a little confused why we're just talking new construction. Because
Good point. It does,
it's not just applying.
it does, it pertains to existing buildings as well too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think generally if it's available, brokers are attaching when they list a property for sale, you know, it's an attachment to the listing, so it's a benefit, right? So.
Yeah.
Good, okay, thanks.
Okay, any dissenters? Great, okay. 1.4, include municipal floodplain administrators and RBs and CBs education and outreach efforts. This would include ensuring floodplain administrators have access to municipal training materials and drafting custom training materials for floodplain administrators. So as part of EFG's DOE grant, this is something that is relevant, and working with the Vermont Association of Planning and Development administrators, at least, for some of Chris's recommendations. So do you want to add something, Chris? or-
Need to add DEC,
Of the
environmental conservation, like.
Yeah. DEC. Okay. Is it is it clear?
DGC is just how people refer to it.
DEC, okay. So we'll need to add those to the list of acronyms as well too. Okay. Does that capture it, Chris? I know you're, okay. Any dissenters? Okay, before I move to charge 2, is there, I guess we better keep moving through it. Then we'll circle back once we get through these. Okay. So charge 2, develop plans and recommendations for a potential transition to a comprehensive program for the RBs and CBs of the Division of Fire Safety, including potential funding sources. So one of the things I just wanted to raise, because we recognized after the fact, is that probably we moved 2.6 from charge 3 up to charge 2. That was one of the changes that we had done in the last.
Join the meeting.
And between when we sent out this table of recommendations and then this is one of the changes that happened when we put the table into the full report and set it out. So I know that there are some suggestions for sort of reordering these, and I just wanted to bring that up. It's not changing the intent here, but I just want to make sure, Mike, that you're aware that there's been some requests to move 2.6 to 2.1 in the list. So it comes at the top of the list. So I just want to put that out there, but maybe I'm going to jump back up and go through these, but I just keep that in mind as we get down to that. So I'm going to start back at 2.1 and then we'll move down to that.
Just 1 second, Richard.
Yeah.
Right? Someone has joined the meeting with a phone number. Could you identify yourself?
That's me, Craig. I just sent you a text, Scott. I just lost my Wi-Fi on fire. Sorry about that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So 2.1, incorporate RBs and CBs certificates for buildings currently under DFS jurisdiction into the DFS permit database expansion. And this would entail provide an opportunity for stakeholder feedback on the database structure as part of that incorporation. DFS would be the responsible entity, and funding would come from DFS and PSD. Any comments on that?
This is different.
Any dissenters? Great.
So clarify one more time.
Yep.
What you said was for those areas that they have jurisdiction today.
Yeah,
That's all you
yes.
said.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Currently under DFS jurisdiction.
Okay.
Yeah. And actually, let me jump down because there are footnotes to the 2 asterisks, just so that people are clear what that means. So at the bottom of the table, the two asterisks mean updated recommendations from Act 47. So those are, and the one asterisk is a repeat recommendation from Act 47. So
Yeah, so updates are just minor modification, I would say, to language that was included in recommendations in the Act 47 report. So like for this particular example of the permit database, I think that the inclusion of the language about buildings currently under DFS jurisdiction is the update to the Act 47 recommendation, for example.
Right, we hadn't clarified that in Act 47. Yes.
Just one comment on this, I would, I think when you're looking at the chart there and you're looking at, responsible entities, there would have to be, and I know you got it in the narrative here, but there'd have to be input from others on the makeup of this certificate and all that kind of stuff, because I wrote down in my response, we're not energy efficiency experts here. So that certificate that you're going to design based on whether you're going to certify somebody, register somebody, that's going to have to come from some other entity. And then we will coordinate those data inputs to our system, just for clarity.
Yeah.
So I'm
Certificates already done.
Yeah,
Already done.
okay.
I'm happy to add EFG if that'd be helpful, and Efficiency Vermont. I mean, I'm looking to that as well too. Would you be okay to be named as well if that would address your suggestion, Mike?
I mean, we have existing certificates right now.
We do.
So they don't need to be redesigned. And they can't differ in a major way from what's already been designed.
That's true.
So they're there.
Yeah, I would suggest PSD because that's who's making the certificate anyways.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you can add PSD there.
Yeah, so you're asking Department of Fire Safety to acknowledge that there's a certificate there. That's really the only requirement from this?
Well, and to build it into their permit database,
Mm-hmm.
which doesn't exist.
What does that look like to change your permit database?
As of right now, under Title 30, these certificates have to be posted on site.
Right.
So I'm gonna look at this as an efficiency gain here with our software. It would be nice to link those certificates to our permit that we're issuing. It'll make it easier for us to understand who has filed the certificates and who hasn't. And then the other side of this is our new software package will be public facing. So folks will be able to go in and look at stuff in a read-only format. So you should be able to pick up these certificates in a read-only portion of our database. So we're going to support this.
This is great. Yeah, this is a huge development. So thank you for that.
That'll work.
Just to be, I don't know this, but like, do you have to bring in, do y'all have a state IT office or somebody else that would have to be a part of this?
In about in 2-3 weeks, our IT contract will be signed and then we've had some initial discussions on this already. So we will we'll figure this out during the implementation phase, which is about a year-long process.
It's the
ADS.
yeah, the Agency of Digital Services, is that, are you working with them with the contractor?
Yeah, you have to.
We have been
You're
working with
required to.
everybody and their brother.
Yeah.
Everybody and their
It's
brother.
required.
ADS, internal auditors, external auditing also and so forth. Yeah.
That's why that not in the state's business,
Oh,
just
yeah.
have a complete list of everybody who's in the.
Yeah, you have to.
Okay, great. Making good progress. 2.2. Ensure that the detailed inputs from RBs and CB certificates are logged as unique data points in the database to ensure the data are accessible for future analyses. This would include developing a fillable form for RBs and CB certificates to ease integration into the database. I'm assuming, Mike, you'd like probably to have the same entities named as were named under 2.1. Shall we add EFG and PSD to that?
Yeah, just 1 second here, where. We're under 2.2 right now.
2.2.
Yeah, I just put down neutral on this, but we just, we're not.
It's a detail within the process.
So I have no heartburn with this.
The department typically develops a fillable form for our website as well.
Okay.
Wait, Sandy, your comment?
I'm speaking for VDRA, I'm not sure Jim can get it speak. For 2.2, we suggested adding some clarifying language. A sentence first that would say, create an energy compliance upload as part of a project's permit application. And then Zach's wording, and then after that, project closeout will include certification that the project was completed according to specifications or details changes. These comments were submitted yesterday as inline tracked changes after the hearing. And they are basically continuing Act 47's language. Just trying to make this more what do you call it? Actionable.
So this changes our opinion a little bit because only because that puts the onus on us on the front end on the plan review side. So this is a little different than accepting a compliance certificate on the back end.
Does it?
I don't know how that would play into our permit process as we see it right now.
Well, but if DFS is not DHJ, is not responsible for administering energy codes sort of efficiently, then all the I think probably the point of this really is while you're in database design, it would be good to have this, take the opportunity to be able to capture this data. The fillable form isn't designed yet, and or rather online form isn't designed yet, so that would still need to be done. But the point is to have the capability of capturing that data, the fine grained data in your database in future years as this gets developed.
I think he's responding to Sandy's addition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Certify, I think that's what I got.
Right, this is.
Yeah.
He's okay with how it's phrased here.
I'm okay with how it's phrased here.
Not the change.
All right, I sorry.
Yeah.
Looking at.
Okay. I'm not quite sure in the process.
Fortunately, I got an IT thing going on.
So
I would suggest that's not clarifying language, that's a new recommendation. And so sort of based on what we had talked about, and the timeline, maybe there's room to revisit that along with other new recommendations after we move through these, but for right now,
it does
the
feel like
recommendation is as it's drafted, I would say.
Yeah. So
on the 1028 version.
So hold that thought. Okay. Is that,
yeah,
so any dissenters on 2.2?
Mike, you're okay with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
Good.
Okay. Move to 2.3. Recommendation is establish a process to transition away from municipal staff filing RVs and CVs certificates in town records and towards a process where certificates are filed directly with the state. This would entail determine an appropriate timeline to transfer this responsibility from municipal staff to the state and update statutory language that requires town clerks to include RV certificates in the land records once a timeline and process have been established and to file certificates with the state. So this would be DFS and legislatures, responsible entities and funded by DFS and PSD.
So I just oppose this because of the single family owner occupied home. Clause in there, otherwise, we're already doing this in 2.2.
Right. I agree, we would oppose it as well.
So we're already doing it in 2.2
Mhm.
on all the buildings we regulate. I'm opposing this section 2.3 because it extends our
Yeah.
jurisdiction into single family owner occupied homes.
Yeah.
Into a regulatory
Mhm.
process. That's it.
Matt,
Can we revise the language to clarify that it is for projects currently within DFS jurisdiction and add language to explore the potential for single family homes or somehow refer to that portion of the report?
Can I
And should
Can I
do
respond to
under-
that, Scott?
Yes.
My concern about that, 'cause I did think about that, is that it would be confusing for the municipalities to be like, oh, these kind of buildings don't, these kind of buildings do, and you would need a statute change, because right now it says they have to file everything in the land records, so you'd be changing it, and then if something else gets decided, you'd have to change it again to include the single family home, so
So it should be one or the other, you're saying, it can't be some go to this.
I just think it would be really
Yes,
confusing
some go
for
to
the
town.
towns, and Chris might have a opinion about that too, to say like, oh, single family you still do, other times you don't for now, and you still would have to change the statute language to allow for that. Yeah, so I think it would be very confusing, you'd have to change statute language just to do that.
I really appreciate the concern, but to some extent, though, right, all the clerks are doing is accepting what people bring them anyway. So I'm not sure how much confusion there would necessarily be, because the clerks aren't going out hunting these things down. People are just bringing them to them. Right, 'cause we're not saying the clerks are going out hunting these things down.
I think there's confusion now about what gets put in the land
Oh,
records, and I think this would be even more confusing to try to bifurcate some kind of buildings.
But I guess what I'm saying from a practical standpoint, what they're doing is they're taking a piece of paper and putting it in the file.
So the difference would be in who's responsible for bringing it to the clerk's office, which would be the homeowner or the builder of a single family home, right?
I mean, the attorney should be, asking for that at closing if it's, appropriate, so.
So confuse the attorneys.
They usually file all of the records when a transfer occurs, so.
So a clarifying question with regard to how 2.3 differs from 2.1. Is it that in 2.1, we're saying that the certificates would be filed with the town and in addition, start to also be incorporated into the DFS database, but that in 2.3, we're now saying it's just one of those. Yes.
Yeah, I think so, and yeah. Well, it seems to me that I take the dissenting comments from DFS and PSD to heart, because I think it does extend into single family, but the question is whether that ultimately is the goal.
My theory is you could get rid of 2.3 and just leave the 2.2 in there where we're taking all those certificates on everything we regulate. Title 30 already requires these certificates to be posted in the land records. And we're opposing this, so is public service, so why even have 2.3 in here?
Matt Sharp.
Yeah, I agree 2.3 is maybe misplaced. And I think we came across this last year where certain things were only going to be recommendations if certain other things were approved. And so we had sub bullets under bullets. And I think 2.6 is actually designate DFS as everything, right? And this one would be a sub bullet of that. Like if DFS is going to be the authority for all building construction, everything, then 2.3 can take place. But until then, it's probably not something that makes sense for what Kelly, basically, I agree with Kelly, it's going to be really confusing if there's two different places to go.
Probably end up with a bunch of RVs at your, the Public Utility Commission and a bunch of fire safety. I mean, depending on, you've got a bunch right now, right? So would they transition to fire safety? Is that the?
No, I mean, how I see the other recommendation working is just that for the buildings under DFS jurisdiction, it'll also include the RBs or CV certificate in the permit database. You could find it that way. But it won't replace the requirement to file it with the department as they do now.
So they got to file a both.
I mean, it's like Mike said, right now they'd have to have it on site, like they have to have it there in the building anyway. So this would take away that need and have all of it together with the permit. But it doesn't take away the need to have to file it with the department.
But in terms of like one comprehensive database,
It's not gonna be one comprehensive database. Exactly.
I think it's also important to recognize with us doing it online this way and having them uploaded, we're not supposed to be granting occupancy to buildings unless that certificate is there. So this is gonna be kind of
checkbox.
Yeah, I think that you're gonna see better compliance.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Right, I agree.
You see,
Yeah.
so we're gonna.
So we're gonna remove.
So, right, good question, Peter, that's right. So, what is the pleasure of the working group? Matt's suggestion was this becomes potentially a sub-bullet under 2.6. Do we remove it altogether?
From a functional standpoint, it is conditional upon 2.6.
Yes.
Whether support or oppose it. So,
We need to see 2.6 before we can make a decision on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perhaps we should jump to that one.
Yeah.
So let's jump to 2.6. I mean, my
That'll
inclination.
help manage time for the rest of the
Somebody
meeting.
keep
My inclination was-
number on.
My inclination was to sort of start with this one because I tend to agree with some that suggested that this sort of might be at the top of the list of this as the biggest issue.
I would say though, like there are things we can do without designating the DFS as the jurisdiction. And I think this is going to be the hardest one to get through anyway. So I almost suggest we go through the rest and decide if any others should come back down to this one.
Yeah.
Okay, that is an approach. So let me just read this so everybody knows what 2.6 is. We'll put it aside and we'll get back to it, but we'll jump back up in the list. But so 2.6, as we've been referring to, is to designate the DFS as a statewide authority having jurisdiction over all building, construction, public, private, commercial, and residential. And as one asterisk, this was at the top of the Act 47 list from last year, and clearly there were some dissenters as well too. So that's what we're referring to there. And why don't we, in the interest of trying to get through some of these others, because that one may be a time sink, let's go.
There's only two others anyway, so.
Let's go through the other two first. So 2.4 is establish a role for the EEUs, energy efficiency utilities, and that's Efficiency Vermont, Vermont Gas Systems, and Burlington Electric Department, collectively known as the EEUs. Establish a role for them to play in supporting energy code compliance, including how EEU efforts can be used to collaboratively support a comprehensive RBs and CBs program at the DFS. So this came from last year's recommendations as well with some tweaks. So this may look like establishing a framework for the EUs to claim savings for energy code compliance support, determine how EEU activities would integrate with authority having jurisdiction, energy code oversight, and as part of tracking energy code compliance, EEUs should establish an approach to identify the percentage of new construction projects that have filed RBs and CBs certificates. This could include leveraging new septic, well water, or permanent electric service requests to identify new construction projects. Projects lacking certificates could be the focus of future EEU compliance support activities. So, Kelly.
I think that the part about including how EEU efforts could be used to collaboratively support a comprehensive RBCCB's program at DFS should also be a sub of 6, because that would assume that there is that comprehensive program. And the same thing with bullet 2, determine how EEU activities would integrate with an AHJ. I would propose those both get moved down. Otherwise, we won't be able to support this. Just put that out there too, if it matters, because it has that component about DFS.
And the second bullet you said too?
Yeah, the second bullet, determine how they would integrate with AHJ. That assumes that AHJ gets named.
Any other comments? Matt?
So,
I'm sorry, Peter.
Yeah, my comment is, I don't know that it's, and the PSD maybe can determine this, but I don't know that it's the EEU's responsibility to be tracking new construction starts and have some role in determining code compliance percentage. We're very adept at education and awareness and support of construction practices, but as far as tracking starts and compliance rates, I just not sure that's our role.
I did raise that comment, Matt, already.
Yeah,
It seems like it's the role of the authority, whoever the AHJ is.
Suggest removing the third bullet.
That the suggestion is
Well, I think the suggestion is that this is the role of the AHJ, so I don't think it's the role of the EEU. So I guess the suggestion is striking it or moving it and rewording it to be the AHJ.
Well, regardless of whether or not it's an EEU responsibility, is there someone who's using those other permits currently as a trigger to look for other compliance issues?
no, not that we're aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Mike did forward a copy of the building permit application or requirements, I guess, a poster for building permits in the state. Every building project in the state, except for single family owner occupied, I think it's correct, is required to have a building permit. So Mike just left the room a second ago, but I wonder if they look for projects that are underway that have not obtained building permits. We'll ask.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right.
According to the architect in the room, they
There's
just.
2 other people from DFS on. I don't know if they can answer the question. Landon and
Yep. Hi, this is Landon Wheeler. So if we actively do look for projects that are underway that are not permitted, that is a normal operation for the Division of Fire Safety, if that answers the question.
Yes.
And just, do you use resources like the septic, well water, permanent electric service data as part of identifying projects that have received permits or not?
When those items are available, they can be utilized. They're not available in every case, and but they have been used in the past to answer that question.
Thank you.
It reminds me, we're talking about this like a compliance issue, but there's also the other sort of consumer-oriented side of things where we talk about trying to make permitting more one-stop shopping experience, so It seems like there's an there's an opportunity that's not really sort of not criticizing anything. I'm just saying, like, as people try to sort this out, I can also imagine for people taking on projects that that single point of entry that would help you not get miss things you need to file because they're in another silo would be a helpful thing for the consumer builder world.
Okay.
I'm wondering for the EEUs, the last sentence of the last bullet though, projects lacking certificates could be the focus of future EEU compliance support activities. That might stay here. I think that's been one of the early proposals, is that the EEUs would require certificates to participate in their programs to ensure that the certificates were done. So Matt, or one of the EEU folks, I don't know what you think of keeping that in this 2.4.
It's funny, when I first read that, I mean, certificates come in after a project's completed. So it would only seem to be pushing future EEU support to existing homes retrofit work for projects that don't comply. I don't know how we see a project that doesn't comply and then find a way for us to bring them into a utility program.
Well, it would seem like it would identify builders or developers who may not be aware of energy code requirements and could benefit from training and technical assistance for the next project. I don't know if that's what you're.
Yeah, that's sort of the intent. So perhaps there's some clarifying language necessary.
So using it to target marketing to prospective users of the EEU support.
Well, I mean, also, if that was a requirement for participation in a new construction program, builders would know offhand, like, you have to meet to participate in this program and get an incentive or whatever it is, or technical assistance, you're gonna have to meet RBs. That's part of the program requirements. That's how I was taking it. As a possibility. I mean, I think it's very broad, like, you could discuss what the EE support, compliance support activities are, but that's one way I would see it possibly coming into play.
Okay. I don't think we'd object to it. I think it's broad enough that it's, you know, it could be the focus. So sure. Okay.
Sandy has a comment.
Could all or part of that bullet 3 just go down to the holding area at the bottom of the report, which is called topics for 2025?
Well, certainly, we are going to have a lot of conversation about that. So, yeah, perhaps. I think, Mike, you had a hand up?
Yeah, so I had opposed this, however, some of this is because we simply don't understand the energy utilities role in all this stuff, but I did indicate in my statement that fire safety would obviously be willing to sit down with the energy efficiency utilities, and if there's some role that we can take as far as awareness, knowledge, how we can spread that information or disseminate it to people and that kind of stuff, we'd be willing to participate in that type of program.
Yeah, I think that there could have been some misunderstanding, Mike, that I don't think that this presumes that EVT or EEU staff would be at sitting in your office, but they could be available as a technical resource remotely as well.
That was one of the suggestions at the last meeting.
Okay.
So,
But it's not really captured in this.
No, that's it, right.
but again, I think that collaboratively support a comprehensive RBs and CBs program at DFS is gonna be the problem for both of us on this one.
So if
that goes, are you okay with it? Staying as established the role, it's just, if it's just stuff, you push that other half out and put it to 2.6 collaboratively.
Oh, right,
You took that out, you'd be
right,
okay with
right.
it, yeah.
So you're saying if this phrase were struck and we,
And the corresponding bullet
uh,
about AHJ.
this, oops, sorry,
Mhm.
that were struck. Establishable for EEs to play in supporting energy code compliance, including.
How about stopping at compliance,
Yeah, you'd pull out that after the comma.
right?
Yeah, good
I
suggestion.
mean, that makes a statement.
Does that work?
I still think the third bullet should be removed. But as far as these two go, I think it does work, yeah.
I think the third bullet could move to 2.6, the south of 2.6, except for that project's lacking one part. I think that could stay.
I would want it stricken altogether, I think, just because of the way it's worded. I just don't think it's a role of the EU.
Whole third bullet,
Yes.
That's fine with me.
and including the last phrase that we had talked about as well too.
No, that can stay. I think that's reasonable to stay.
Yeah, starting with projects lacking, to keep that phrase.
Okay.
Yeah, as Matt was saying, though, a project lacking certificate is a horse out of the barn.
How do you find them?
Really, what we're talking about is builders or developers who don't file a certificate for a project they've just completed, might be targets for future or focus for future compliance support.
So maybe projects should be builders or contractors, Richard.
Maybe something like that, yeah.
Well, I still think there is a value because there is a lot of buildings that comply, but they don't file the certificate. So again, I do think that participating in a program and saying you have to file your certificate to get your incentive, I do think is a worthwhile.
Right, that's a good point. That's a good point.
But I'm not required today to file a certificate.
Yes, you are required by law to file a certificate. They just don't all the time.
There's no penalty.
Because there's no penalty if you don't.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay.
That language is okay.
But I think
The rest is right.
getting a
Yeah.
state incentive should mean that you do what you're supposed to do, and that's file a certificate.
Got it. I wasn't looking at it that way, but that makes
That's why
sense.
we're here, right?
Yep. So adding builders and contractors to projects, is that sort of broaden, does that help or
I think it's.
it's okay?
Doesn't.
Okay. So with those changes,
With 2.5, or what happened here?
Did you guys see I have my hand up?
Oh, sorry.
Craig.
That's okay. And it looks like my internet's very unstable, but it's on right
No,
now. but
we see it now.
like-
Thanks for raising.
Looks like I came back at the right time because this is the issue I've been bringing up. I'm just curious with all the stricken language here, what Matt and Kelly and others think, what are we gonna do here? Like, what is the next step? I don't see with what's left for language, like what is gonna happen with the EU role?
Well, it's the first bullet, right? Establishing a framework for the EEUs to claim savings. And our understanding is that there's ongoing discussions between the EEUs and the departments around what that looks like.
Yeah, but that's not helping Department of Fire Safety with their staffing problems, which we're just gonna not do that, or that's just.
I think what we talked about, Craig, was like the other one, maybe moving it as a sub bullet to 2.6, so that you have everything under if the assumption about DFS becoming the AHJ. It just doesn't make sense to be separate from that.
So the stricken language moving down, is that's.
Okay. All right.
That's what I thought we were talking about. I mean, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe others just were striking it in its entirety, but
I think
it would
we're
seem
striking it
like.
from 2.4, but with the presumption that we're moving, we'd be moving it to
Sorry, I
2.6.
missed that. No.
Is that right?
That's what I thought we
That's
were.
what I thought too. All right, Matt?
Yeah, I think because that 2.4 was stricken to remove the DFS side of things, this almost becomes in itself something that could be up in charge one about raising awareness and building more code compliance through the EU work, rather than in this section, which is develop plans for a transition to DFS. So this can happen up above in one, I guess is my suggestion.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Move to charge. So with these, and anything else on 2.4? So with these changes, are there, let's see, so the responsible entities would probably not include DFS anymore. It's stricken. We stricken the role of DFS here. So does that make sense to strike DFS from the responsible parties? And so it's really EEUs and the PSD that are working on this. So with those changes, are there any dissenters?
Once, going twice, sold. All right,
okay.
Wait, 5.
2.5. Create a comprehensive document detailing the costs associated with RBs and CVs energy code administrators at DFS and calculate the incremental permit fees that would be required to support ongoing energy code administration. So leverage some of the work that's been done by the DFS for buildings currently under DFS jurisdiction and EFG for owner occupied single family to put energy code administrative costs into one accessible document. We started that work, as we heard in the previous working group session, work in progress, but we would, EFG would work with DFS to move that forward, and that would be paid for under our DOE grant.
Is that a one-time grant or ongoing?
It's a one-time grant. It's a 3-year grant, and we're approaching the first year, so the 2 more years of that grant.
So my reason for asking, because I probably will dissent on this, my reason for asking really has to do with the fact that we've looked at different cost estimates, which I think are extremely light in the aspect of both training, incorporating specialists into DFS and implementation. And even if we say the best of the lightest, we're just under $2 million additional. Now, we can justify that with one-time funds, sure. But when we start looking at putting that on the burden of either the builder or the tax or the home purchaser or whatnot, we're looking at an extreme cost to either taxpayers or to the home builders. And our estimates were given based on $200,000 houses, when we actually know build outs of houses are averaging somewhere in the $350,000 to $400,000 range. And the cost, the housing costs are not affordable today without some sort of government funding out there. And I'm not trying to get down into the weeds, just trying to say, we will dissent on this, and it will be all based on the cost of administration of this and the cost to the users and taxpayers of Vermont.
So go ahead.
I just wanted to make the point that this isn't recommending that a permit fee be implemented. This is just recommending that the estimated costs that would be associated with that be documented and available for future discussion, essentially.
And really analyzed.
Yeah, refined, analyzed.
And incorporating some of the points you just raised as well, too. If we've got making sure that we're using the right home costs and the rest of those elements.
So in my opinion, this response that we have here on 2.4 5 doesn't really say much. I mean, the charge that we have is to investigate potential funding sources. And what we're saying here is basically, we think we should investigate potential funding sources. So I had submitted a proposed table. I mean, of all the stuff that I submitted, this is probably the most worthy of debate, but we'll jump right in. I propose that the answer to this 2.5 include a reference to table A4, which is a compilation of the numbers that Michael DeRocher shared in an earlier meeting. And it is not, and on the cost side and the potential revenue side, if the costs were to be covered by permit fees alone, how much would it cost? This is not to endorse that approach, but it is to just kind of lay out, saying we were charged with looking at options. So far, we've looked at this one option. This is how much it would cost. We're continuing to look at this, and stay tuned. Next year, we'll say more about it.
Is this your projected cost spreadsheet? You have one?
Yes, yeah. Oh, that's like this. Yeah.
Or you said,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a minor note. The 3 footnotes that were included should not be there. Those were referencing the single family home column, which after some internal discussion with some colleagues, we were originally thinking we would include single family home numbers. We decided in the end not to include that as their TBDs. So that part, will be more clear next year. So those 3 footnotes should go away.
Is there a hand raised? I don't see one. Okay. There's a hand raised over here, however.
Jim Bradley had his hand up. I don't know if he's changed his mind.
No, thank you, Senator Bray. What I was going to add is basically what Matt was saying, but also in the part under where it said leverage the work done by DSF. If we can point to in this section the table A4 as part of the analysis that's already been done for the cost of getting this going, but also in the wording where it says leverage in the middle column, what the VBRA was putting in there was to begin analyzing startup and ongoing costs to administer energy codes for owner-occupied single-family homes. Just because that is the one thing that I think any of the builders are concerned about, that are, what is it costing me? What's it going to cost to administer this, and who's going to fund that? And I will add this too. Seemingly, we continue to dance around the one thing of who is the AHJ, and it doesn't mean that the AHJ, once established, is going to be up and running and fully on all cylinders, running on all cylinders, but it's going to be a phased-in approach. But I really think one of the strongest recommendations that we can make to the legislature moving forward is not talking about an AHJ, but saying that it needs to be identified and funded with the proper resources. And that's the biggest thing, because otherwise we're going to have these great ideas without the resources to ever see them fully functional.
I have a really strong feeling about putting the table. My only concern is that, sorry, Scott and press, but especially legislators are very busy and they don't always read the fine print. And I am a little worried because the DFS numbers were obviously just for buildings currently under their jurisdiction and did not include single family homes. So I would be concerned about the 1.5 million being out there is like, this is what it's going to take. And that's not even close to what it's going to take. That's just for the buildings currently under their jurisdiction. So that would be my concern about including the table versus just keeping this and looking at the full picture and the next working group.
Yeah, I agree with Kelly, because we even picked up more expenses after that particular report was filed, including auditing and stuff like this, which was brought up by outside folks.
Yeah,
So
that was our thought, that there was
Yeah.
more work to be done in coordination before numbers were ready for public.
yeah, so I supported the 2.5 in order to get into the comprehensive evaluation of the cost.
Yeah.
This.
Yeah, as opposed to putting numbers out right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, do others have thoughts on that?
Well, just a question of, so the table we're considering is A4, isn't it?
A4.
A4. Are there other tables that you know, we looked at one cost analysis earlier on. Are those tables, are we planning to include those or no, or is?
I think those are in the same boat. Like there's more, I would say what EFG presented definitely needs refinement, more research into what the median home prices are, more sensitivity analyses included. And it sounds like DFS has, uncovered some other pieces they would also like to research further and incorporate.
That's the thing with the tables is I'm afraid that, we haven't fully calculated the costs. And I mean, if we're gonna put a tape, I prefer to see no dollars in this. In other words, here are the categories that we, want to explore. But I mean, we're making so many assumptions that just aren't.
It's not right. We're not ready to put this out, it seems to me.
And if we do, to Kelly's point, legislators are going to grab that number and run with it, and
And so is the press.
So it may harm.
We wanted to be a little bit more thoughtful and refined before we do that, I think.
A quick question, only because Tim brought it up about 2 meetings ago. Are we because the way to get compliance is that we show some sort of return on investment. Are we calculating some sort of return on investment to this in some fashion?
Well, we do as part of the code update process, that's done to justify each iterative version of the code.
Well, didn't Matt Sharp, didn't they also do an analysis of like
From
what
baseline, yes.
lack of compliance, like basically what savings were foregoing by a lack of compliance? I think that's in the SharePoint site. So there was some additional analysis done on like, if we got 100% compliance, like what would the additional savings be that we would gain from that?
Right. Yeah, and I was gonna chime in, like, I'm a little concerned that we're only talking costs here and we're losing the benefit half of unless, it's hard to look on screen and see, maybe benefits are calculated and discussed explicitly elsewhere, but I'm not seeing it. Because if we only talk costs, I agree completely. We should know exactly what we're asking people to spend on operating the system. But it would seem like we're not doing our job if we also don't say, and here are the benefits we anticipate from, operating under this new paradigm.
But Chris, when you mention benefits, we're kind of dancing around greenhouse gases and the carbon impact and all that, except Vermont's contribution to all that is less than, or in the range of 0.10%, 0.10 of 1%, of which the housing or residential field only makes up 1/4 of that point.
Well, there are different
No, I know that, but he's talking, hold on, he's talking about the overall cost effect and savings.
Wait, but there's 2 ways of looking at this. One is from the consumer's point of view, from the person who's paying the bill point of view, and the other is from the societal point of view.
Right.
So,
and I was hitting on costs.
And I think that it's important to look at benefits to the consumer for purposes of a cost effectiveness calculation, but for the purposes of incentives provided by the state, by all of us, then we would include societal benefits.
And all I was talking about was return on investment.
Yes, and return on investment is a customer point of view.
Someone has their hands up. Jonathan?
Right. So can we just, before I don't want to get stuck here. Are we addressing benefits elsewhere? And because I'm looking sort of through a periscope here in the screen, just a part of the document. And we're going to get to it. I don't want to slow us down if we're going to have, to Richard's point, right? There's benefits to the customer and then there's also societal benefits. I just want to make sure, and I think it's appropriate to distinguish one from the other, but I also want to just make sure we're going to get to those so we don't sometimes we hamstrings ourselves only by talking about costs and leaving out the benefit portion. That's all I'm trying to get at.
So I would suggest that we include something around a cost effectiveness calculation or something in this 2.5. So a cost effectiveness calculation presumes a calculation of benefits.
There's also, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name for the representative from Twin Pines, but he's patiently had his hand up for a moment or two or three.
I just noticed it just now. Should we go to that person?
Yeah, Jonathan.
Thank you, Senator Bray. This is John Rodenberg with Twin Pines. Just very quickly, I live in the remodeling world, and I would argue there is a very strong case to be made to the legislature, the public at large, the media, that the cost of not implementing these permit fees and everything that's needed to fund proper inspections and implementation, the cost of not doing that vastly outweighs the cost of doing it, simply because the failures that are happening are costing homeowners tens of thousands of dollars on an annual basis, that a hundreds of dollars permit fee would be nothing compared to the egregious repairs that people are having to do to their homes because of lack of compliance that happens every day.
Excellent point. Thank you. We need to keep moving though. Quick comments.
Sure. Yeah, if I may. So, I mean, my impression was the EUs were going to be the ones that would create the cost benefit analysis on this.
Well, this is part of what 2.5 is about, is doing some analysis of the costs. I think if we add a cost effectiveness phrase in there, that would include an analysis of benefits.
And benefits.
Yeah. Sandy, quickly.
Yeah, it's difficult to talk about 2.5 before we talk about 2.6, but I noticed in general that the structure about the AHJ designation seems to have three parts. One is simply designating an AHJ. And that theoretically doesn't cost anything if there's no actions or responsibilities associated with it. Number two is extending, that's just a theory, very abstract. So then the step number two, phasing in would be jurisdiction over all public buildings. And then the distant step three would be owner occupied single family homes. I think we can think of that. I feel like this committee has a strong obligation to get down to numbers at some point. And hopefully it will happen by next year. And it seems to me that the structure that Matt suggested AIA Vermont worked on is very simple. That the costs, whatever they are, would be covered by permit fees. And it seems that the scope is not that large compared to an $8 permit fee per 1,000 construction. It's less than $1.
So this is the analysis that we're
Yeah,
asking.
just something, if this group can kind of give the roadmap for getting to step number two of authority, I think the group would make progress. But I agree that actual numbers are spiritual.
Okay, so to Sandy's last point, can we agree that providing numbers in this report is premature? And that this 2.5 is to do more work on that, and it could be based on where what the AHJ may look like, where this is all headed. There are going to be different costs associated with different pathways forward, and let's use the next year to come up with those numbers so we don't latch on to something. We don't put something out there now that people latch on to that is probably going to be wrong. Yeah. Is that okay?
I would agree with that, including numbers. What I'm not sure yet is how much of what you just said will be included in the narrative that follows the table that describes this number. We could in that section of the report include, for example, the bottom half of table A4 is the existing. It just explains the existing staff numbers of DFS. It indicates the number of permits over the past 3 years. That's just factual historical information. And then we could include that. If you want to go a step further, we could include the chart above without the numbers, but say that the projected number of people required at this time, we believe is this, but not include the costs.
Yeah, I think we
We said
could,
that's not complete, like.
right, but we could have, the analysis could include these factors and list them out as you just did, without putting numbers next to them. We could certainly do that.
But he just said putting the number of positions that.
No numbers, but just, we would be looking at staff positions, the cost of
Sure.
administration, those elements.
No dollar numbers, but would we?
And no expenses, no vehicles.
But the number of
those would
staff
only
needed.
be, those would only be considered as part of doing this analysis.
Yeah.
How to stand up another agency.
All right. We should move on here.
Okay, so
we're
before
at
you
our
go,
90
I
minutes.
know, Richard, you're heading out the door. I have you down as dissenting on this one. Are you still feeling that way, even though they're not specific numbers? It's just doing.
Sure, you want to pull me off it. I don't think we're getting into where we should be going. It's all that return on investment. If you tell me within that piece, we will reference some type of return.
I did add
on
and benefits. I did add that line, the costs and benefits. So I think that
You
gets
can
to your
take that.
point.
Okay, excellent.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Hey,
Okay.
Richard,
Yeah.
could you, in your comment box for that, maybe underneath where I'm talking about cost and benefits, you could put Richard's, ROI reference, just so we don't lose that sort of nugget.
I look forward to seeing the report.
Okay, thank you, Richard.
See. Thank you. Okay. 2.6. So time.
This will be easy. Yeah, so we put up our 90 minutes now, and we
Do
have.
we want to do 3.1 first?
Can we do that?
Yeah, it might just be
Yeah, to get
quicker.
through it.
Yeah. I think 3.1 should be
Okay.
relatively quick.
So let's do that. If everybody's okay with that, we'll go to 3.1 and then we'll jump back to 2.6.
Please.
So charge 3 is consider whether or not the state should adopt the statewide building code. 3.1 is provide the necessary resources to ensure the DFS and the IRC working group can answer key questions about the cost and impacts associated with adopting the IRC. This would include identifying any funding or staffing resource gaps and source outside consulting services as needed. With the DFS leading the charge. DFS and the legislature bearing the costs of this. Mike, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, after the Thanksgiving holiday, we will get on to some better frequency of our group meetings. But you have a list of I'm not gonna say concerns, there are a list of items that we need to review as a group. We will be transparent with this. We have probably 15 people that are on this work group. More than happy if somebody else wants to join, send me an email, we'll add you to the list. There's other items beyond what is on that list that topics that we'll have to discuss as a group. But the key takeaway here is you can't just assume that you have this international residential code and all of a sudden you can just adopt this standard. Not gonna happen. Even if the legislature were to come back and say you have to adopt this IRC, you cannot do that without a massive amount of fundamental administration assessment on that particular standard, just like we do with the IBC or the Life Safety Code or NFPA 1 or any of the other 200 standards that we play around with. We're 2 code cycles behind on the IBC right now. And until we can get our rulemaking under control here, I would be doing a disservice to folks, including my own division staff, by adopting this code without a thorough evaluation of it, just, we're trying to get the IBC updated to the 2021s, which we hope to be able to do here late spring, very early summer, and get all these codes up to the 2021 version. But there's a lot of implications on the IRC too, right? Do we have the list is there.
You provided that.
All I'm looking for is this group to support us, moving this group and this evaluation forward. It needs to be done. And I'm not opposing the adoption of it. It is looking at these items that are on that list and seeing what the impact of those items are, so that we do this in a responsible manner and we do it right.
So looking at what you submitted in response to the draft report, you indicated that the division would oppose this 3.1, but it seemed like it was on the basis of the assumption that it's talking about adopting the IRC for use single-family owner-occupied houses.
Correct.
Is that implication embodied here?
I think the intent of the recommendation is really to do everything you just laid out, Mike.
Right, it's to support you in those efforts.
Yeah, just to answer those questions.
Suppose something were to be added about buildings, public buildings currently under DFS.
Right,
Would that satisfy your opposition?
yes, it would, but I just, on recommendation 3, the language is consider whether or not the state should adopt a statewide building code.
Okay.
The intent on the terminology statewide was that it would cover single-family owner occupied homes.
Okay.
So if you want to change.
You can't change the charge, but.
So I'm just telling you why I.
Okay, that's helpful.
Narrative I put down because obviously we support.
Right.
The study of the IRC.
Okay, well, that helps, yeah. I'm not sure how we deal with that.
For buildings currently under DFS jurisdiction?
Starting with, or something, I think, I take your point, I think the implication is there that it would be statewide for all buildings.
Right.
So, maybe we just say that we would start with buildings that are public buildings currently under DFS jurisdiction. So I think Peter.
I guess I'm reading this charge differently because the charge itself does not refer to DFS. The charge is only referring to whether the state should adopt a statewide building code. DFS's position could be, we think the state should adopt a building code, but it shouldn't be us doing it. But that's different than what I think 3.1 should be speaking to. I think there's plenty of material from last year's report which supports the need for a statewide building code.
If I could just chime in to clarify something, this group that I started was in response to a housing study that was running in parallel with the energy efficiency study last year. So the question back about a year ago was very broad. It stated, should the state adopt a statewide building code? It didn't say the IRC, it just said, should the state adopt a statewide building code, which was intended to apply to single-family owner-occupied homes. The housing study that I was involved with, and Sandy was part of this group, the comments were, should the state look at adopting the IRC for a 1- and 2-family dwellings? So that's where this study group morphed from was, were we gonna apply the IRC to the 1- and 2 families? Because right now we use the life safety code and our Vermont Fire Building and Safety Code. So that's where the group was as a result of the housing study, just happens to be now, it runs in parallel with this.
Okay,
So it really is for 1 and 2 family.
It was in its inception, but what I've done here is agree to look at this from a holistic perspective. But again, and you'll hear in 2.6.
all right, well, let's push on.
Yeah.
We have a couple of
Couple
comments. Go ahead.
hands.
Yep. John.
Thank you, sir. Just a quick question. I'm curious, and forgive my ignorance, but is it possible to have a hybrid situation where DFS simply retains their current jurisdiction? They do not enter the world of single family owner occupied, but they do start to look at IRC for the 1 and 2 families within their jurisdiction. But then also the state adopts the IRC for all single family owner occupieds without having any enforcement in place yet, which I know sounds crazy, but that's what we're doing with the RBES, the RBs already. RBs exist, it's not enforced, but at least there's a standard of care in place. So for savvy homeowners or for those who are litigating against builders, they have something to show, look, the state has said we ought to do this. You didn't do this. Right now we have nothing. Is that even a possibility to have a bifurcated situation like that?
Maybe. I think this is the topic that we had decided we were going to basically
part of this
punt
would
from next
be-
year.
This IRC subject is actually, I would ask this, does it even belong in this energy efficiency study? That's question one, because it does not really belong in this charge of this energy efficiency rule. That's my opinion. Number two is, even if you were to do this as a standard of care and put it in the appendix, you still have multiple conflicts within that standard.
That's the problem.
The energy efficiency chapter, for example, conflicts with the RBs now.
Right.
You have to go through that methodically.
Right.
And pull out all those conflicts, because you enter into civil matters.
Yeah.
And these conflicts are going to arise.
Yeah. Yes, but I think this is also what we were talking about putting off until next year, because this is a 2-year working group and it's a big topic. But it is also a charge.
It is a charge, right? We were asked to address this.
Yes,
year.
yeah. That sharp.
Yeah, I was just going to comment exactly what you just said, that we kind of agreed that this was a next year's part of this working group to get into the weeds on, I think. And I wonder if we want to just post down here that we are, a lot of what Mr. DeRocher's just said, that we're considering the implications of an IRC, and we're going to continue that deliberation or discussion in our working group in 2025.
Yeah,
And that's what's in the body.
Okay, excellent. So maybe we can.
So I don't want to keep us here for long. Can we put the word benefits in there again? I'm going to keep coming back to that.
Costs and benefits. The cost and impact, cost, benefits.
Well,
and impacts.
cost, impacts, I'm guessing are like, I don't know, administrative considerations or something, but cost, benefits and impacts. Great, thanks.
Right.
To me, we don't have to wordsmith this stuff, but I'm a little concerned that we're thinking about this in terms of monetary costs and benefits. And that's a life safety code.
Yeah.
All
right.
Energy code is not necessarily, it is a global, it's a life safety code that's different than.
Right.
So I would be inclined to ask that we had key questions about the cost, benefits, including life safety benefits and impacts associated with adopting.
Okay, well, impacts suggest that to me.
Well, it's suggested, but we never talk about it.
Yeah.
And everybody keeps talking about how much it costs to do this, that, and another thing.
Right.
We're not talking about if your structure collapses because it was built,
right,
out of compliance with the code.
Yeah.
Or if it burns down because nobody's looking at the wiring and plumbing, that just those kind of stuff.
Yeah, or wood installation.
Does that do it, Chris?
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Peter, quickly.
Yeah, so my correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard you say that your IRC group is studying single family as well as commercial. They're not?
Yeah, well, the code applies, the code itself, the context and the technical aspects of the code, the way that it depends how it's adopted, right, and how it's enforced or whatever, but it applies to single family homes and duplexes. So the content of the code applies to all those structures.
Yeah, well, I was just curious, so starting with buildings currently under DFS, you know, does that matter to you at this point? Because it applies to everything, so.
Where, when we get to 2.6.
Well, we're.
Shut up.
It's a good segue. Let's go right on to 2.6.
Well, let's see, let's just, any dissenters on 3.1 as with the edited language that's in there? You okay with that, Mike? Yeah, great, okay, thank you. Okay, the elephant in the room. 2.6, designate the DFS as a statewide authority having jurisdiction over all building construction, public, private, commercial, residential. This would entail update statutes such that the DFS is listed in the AHJ for all building construction as an effort under the legislature, with the DFS being the responsible, I guess the legislature's responsible entity, DFS with the cost. So.
Any dissenters? Fine.
Yep.
It's not quick enough.
Before we get into, I know there's strong opinion, but I just would ask that maybe one of the things that concerns me most about this is that we talk about assigning the authority, but we make no reference to appropriations. I know that that's not always done, but to me, that is, I just hate to see another situation where authorities are assigned, but the funding is not. To me, I know that may be assumed by especially legislators, that would, but I would just, before we get into the pro or con, I would just respectfully request that we add appropriations. I know we don't know what those are, but it worries, it makes me nervous, and then also just even having a conversation with my RPC peers or others, I just want to note that we're not just talking about the authority, we're also talking about what the appropriations would be.
Right. Might we say something like with an appropriation to cover necessary resources?
Yeah.
I guess I agree. And with all due respect, anyone who thinks that legislators don't think about it. I've said many times very explicitly in committee, we're not going to ask an agency or department to take on a task without providing them the funding to do it. And that's me in a committee of jurisdiction. What the actual mileage may vary piece is that then bills from a committee of jurisdiction go through the end of session appropriation grinder. And sometimes money is removed entirely, money is cut, stuff like that. So I appreciate, I just want to sort of, there's two sides to it. And I think I'm glad that Chris is bringing that up to make it explicit from the get-go, because I think we've never asked Mike to take on things without saying that he should be appropriately funded. Otherwise, he can't succeed, and then the program can't succeed. It's a dismal.
So does this cover that, Chris? Is the language there?
Yeah. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Kelly?
Yeah, I don't understand how, I agree that there has to be an appropriation that goes with it, but I don't understand how we have an appropriation when we don't know how much of appropriation is needed. It seems a little backwards and preliminary to me. And I don't think it should go without it, but we don't know what the number is, so.
That's what the study is all about.
Right, so I don't think it belongs in this recommendation. Well, this isn't this, it's shaded as legislative recommendation, so that is an additional concern for me. I don't think you can put this in legislation for this year and not have
it.
Okay. So I don't disagree with the need to combine and to think about both sides of the coin. authority and funding appropriations. To me, 2.5 is about the funding side, the costs, and 2.6 is about the benefits side. So I think we are talking about, we have set up a framework to talk about both with these two items. And to your point, Kelly, I agree. And the point of this chart, which we're not going to include the dollar values, was to start to try to define what the costs would be. So then you can get to step 2, which is to identify the funding sources. But if I could just step back 1 second, AI Vermont agrees with the opinion to move 2.6 to 2.1. I think that the current 2.1, 2, and 3 are all about the certificates, which are all fine, but the responses kind of jump into one component of the response to the problem at hand. And so we submitted this table A3, which is a color-coded chart, which shows the how the transition would be phased. So I think that, to me, the big important takeaway, the big important thing to communicate with this item is that transition to DFS would be phased and what that would look like. What that looks like includes a role for the EEUs, which is on the chart, because the EEUs are currently the people who have the expertise on the ground, boots on the ground. So for example, the chart shows how they would step in first and then that could transition to DFS by the year 2030. That's just one example. But so yeah, so that's why we propose to move this up and to answer this question kind of graphically.
Let me try to find, go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, again, I feel like that's cart before the horse, like before you even determine the cost and the benefits and whether it's cost effective, you're planning the transition and the phasing. It doesn't make sense to me before you've even answered the question of, does this make sense? Is it cost effective? So I'm not for diving into it's new and we haven't discussed it. And I think there's a lot of components to it, but and I think it's late in the game to discuss it. But also, I think it's putting the cart before the horse before you even know what the costs and benefits are.
I guess it's kind of a chicken and the egg problem. I mean, you have to have you don't know what you're costing unless you have a plan. So this is the plan that would be costed.
Well, to me, that's the roadmap to get to a final place that you haven't decided is where we're gonna go. And we don't know how much it costs to get there, so that's my opinion about it.
Chris?
I'll be honest, my struggle with this is, as speaking more for myself as opposed to all my RPC colleagues, is I'm not necessarily convinced that it is DFS. I'm not convinced that there's not another model that we should pursue. I think we don't have the structures in place right now. And I know we're trying to move this along, and I'm not trying to hammer, I'm just voicing for my thinking on this. There's the whole, and I'm not trying to tangle up in this, but like the whole county and regional governance discussion that's happening about like what capacities might make sense in Vermont to achieve economies of scale. And so like in Massachusetts, they have councils of government, and those councils of government through work by, they're different than RPCs, and that's the people who sit on the council are the actual highest level elected official in a municipality, and they decide collectively what they want to share their monies towards in terms of services. So I'm not saying we do what Massachusetts does, using this as an example. So in Massachusetts, the municipalities have to take this on. Well, through a council of government, sometimes they're able to collectively hire that building inspector to do that work at the local level. But then others can continue to just do it on their own. But the only reason I bring that up, I'm not saying that's going to happen or that that's what should happen. I'm just a little, I'm just not necessarily sold that it has to be fire safety that's doing it. And so I wish we could just have a more robust discussion within this kind of larger discussion about just what makes sense for Vermont to achieve more of these life safety goals. And, we called this out in the climate action plan and other things too, about really having discussions about within the Vermont context, not just applying some other model, but what works within the Vermont context. So I don't know exactly, I'm still trying to figure out exactly where, maybe I just abstain, but that's my thinking.
Matt Sharp has his hand up that is not for.
Right. Well, I just have one comment on what Chris just said, and that is that one of the things that we've been talking about last year and this year is the need for some office to be in charge.
Sure.
And so I guess there's two possibilities, at least two possibilities. One is we create a new office, and another is we sort of add responsibilities to an existing office. So that's kind of.
But there would still need to be some state agency.
Yes, even if implementation was distributed in some fashion.
Absolutely.
So,
Matt Sharp.
Yes, thank you. So with all due respect, with everyone who dissents that the DFS should take this on, and I wouldn't say I know for sure that's what I'd agree with as well, but the charge was to develop the how, and we're getting bogged down in if, and if we can never get through the how, we're not gonna really able to answer whether it's the right decision to do it through DFS or not. So I just want to remind us that we're not here to debate whether or not DFS should be the entity. We're being asked to develop how, so that the legislators can determine if that's a feasible thing to do or whether they should be looking elsewhere. So I think we're not able to get through the content that would be really helpful to figure out the how, because we keep on getting sidetracked on the if.
It's an excellent point. And maybe the wording for 2.6 should somehow reflect that we're developing the, yes, what would it take to designate, I guess is the question.
I think the language or our charge was for the potential transition over to fire safety.
Yes.
So
develop plans and recommendations for a potential transition to a comprehensive program for RBs and CBs at DFS, including potential funding sources.
So, I mean, I sound like a broken record here. This is year 2. Not only is the proposed funding of this, although I appreciate the legislative intent of saying you're gonna fund this program. For those of you that have been involved in state government, or you're in a position that I'm in, responsible for the management of such a vast department, you will recognize what it takes to run the day-to-day operations. Let's not even talk about new programs, new incentives, doing things you should be doing that you're not doing, and so forth. Just running the day-to-day operations of this division is overwhelming. And, our priority going back many, many years ago was to protect Vermonters and the guests that visit the state from fire, carbon monoxide poisoning, electrocutions, hazardous material releases, and that type of stuff. So my mindset is focused in on these things that are life-threatening to people. And when you look at our rental housing program, I could write a novel right now about the challenges we have on the enforcement side of our rental housing health and safety program. This was given to me about 3 years ago. And we are massively challenged with this up through all our management levels in trying to enforce rental housing health and safety in our residential occupancies. And these are the things we're dealing with are life-threatening issues. They're not whether somebody put the right window in and put the right insulation in. And I do understand there is the building science part of it. I do feel like fire safety, whether it's through education, awareness and stuff like this, plays a role in building resiliency. There is a thread there. But when you look at our Department of Public Safety policy across all our departments, our commissioner and our policy advisors within the department are very hard pressed to take on
Sure.
energy efficiency just from a scoping provision that I've tried to lay out here. Naming us the authority having jurisdiction, and sorry, Sandy, but that does have significant implications.
Yeah.
The authority having jurisdiction is specified in the codes and standards in the administrative sections of all our codes. And you have then the legal liability of enforcement. And I would just say that no one has spoke about this, but when you run an energy efficiency program like you're trying to set up here, there is a massive amount of legal implications. What do you do with people that don't comply? But how do you regulate these people? So I have been an advocate to say, which I think, Richard, you've done, I think, a tremendous job on trying to come up with ways to educate our builders and our contractors. I'm willing to do the certificate stuff to bring more accountability to the industry on compliance issues. But I'm just you already know my feelings. I'm going to oppose this. I'll oppose it in testimony. And that's not even talking about the single family home issue, which.
Right. So.
And I'm trying to be very respectful to everybody sitting here because we work with most of you day in and day out. I just.
Yeah, I totally understand.
I understand where I'm coming from.
I'll just make one comment, which is, when I started in the weatherization program more than 30 years ago, I thought we were doing energy efficiency. And what I discovered pretty quickly was actually we were doing health and safety, comfort, durability. And if we did those things right, we also had a more efficient building. So that's what I discovered. So that's why for example, we put in ventilating fans, bath fans in every building starting 30 years ago. Wasn't sufficient, but it was better than nothing, which is what was there before. So anyway, I just want to point out that the RBs and CBs and International Energy Code is a health and safety issue, and also, of course, if you do insulation without air sealing, you get mold growing. That's another issue.
Yeah, I'm certainly not. I don't want to come across as downplaying energy efficiency and where that plays in the building science and all this.
Yeah.
That's not where I am in my mind.
I just realized I got tripped up on language. So if I got tripped on, others might. So I was in my head, the reason why I went off on my spiel was I read authority having jurisdiction over all building construction. So in my head, so you just talked about efficiency. In my head, I'd gone to all building construction, not RBs and CBs, all RBs and CBs, which I think is really the intent of this, right? Or is it all building construction? I mean, are we talking?
I think it's
like building code.
It's, yeah, I think that's.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Jim Bradley has his hand raised.
Okay, Jim?
Yes, thank you. This issue here is, as I said previously, this is the cornerstone of what we're trying to do here, is establish that authority having jurisdiction. And with all these different entities that are out there with limited resources, not one can just take this on and say, yes, we've got capacity. That has to be carved out. And if any of the things that we've been spending the last couple of years trying to do, and years before that, to try to get enacted, if it's going to have any legs, if it's going to have any hope of standing, I mean, how ironic is it that we're trying to get something to stand up to be built appropriately for our building industry, and we can't get there. If we can't make the strongest of recommendations, requirements, demand, whatever, to say this has to be done, there has to be somewhere that this is housed, that with an authority having jurisdiction, and in that it can't be done, you know, without those additional resources. The challenge is this: when a building burns down, that's catastrophic, that's immediate. Okay. And everyone can say, hey, that's pretty significant. And geez, the code should have been better and everything else. When a building science failure happens, usually it's a slow motion failure, and it affects the health and safety of the occupants. It affects the durability of the house, which has to be rebuilt. It affects the finances of Vermonters. So a whole consumer protection thing. But once again, it's not an immediate failure. It starts happening immediately, but it's a slow motion failure. But it doesn't mean it's any less important. And this is where it gets really big, is if the initiative is to push the statewide goal of going from over 600,000 residents to over 800,000 residents, we're going to need more housing, that they're being projected going from 1,300 units a year being built to 6,000 units being built. The problem doesn't go away. It exponentially increases if we don't get this right. So we have a small opportunity of time here to be able to get behind this and really say, you know, be as adamant as we can to this, to say this is the time. It's a 2-year working group, yes, but this is why this is so important, because the health and safety concerns, our housing stock concerns, we have that social obligation to make sure our housing stock lasts, that we don't just keep rebuilding things and wasting materials and resources with limited number of workers that are out there. And we have to just, this is, like I said, the cornerstone of this whole program that we're trying to do here. The goals that Vermont has for, you know, climate change reduction and housing stock being increased and everything else has to be done appropriately. And this is where this begins. If we don't get this right, it's not going to get right on its own. It's just going to be a problem that is exacerbated.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, can I make a suggestion for us to consider? I'm not in the room, so it's hard for me to sort of read the room, but I'm also looking at the agenda, and we have other work to do before we're done. Might we straw poll the official members of the committee and just tally a straw poll on this recommendation? Because I think we did something similar a year ago, which is why we're talking about it still. And it doesn't mean it's resolved. Look, we could have a snapshot on this particular question, knowing there's a lot of complexity behind it to be worked through. But you know, I do feel like that might help us get closure and let us move on and finish for today, just knowing where people land on this issue.
Yep, let's do that. Sandy has one comment. It's going to be very quick.
Yeah, I'd like to just suggest making this gentler, and then maybe we can get more consensus that way in your committee. So what if it changed to move towards establishing fire safety as the authority over all building construction in Vermont? And by using a phased approach. And that way, it expresses the general sentiment without putting, as Mike pointed out, I was wrong with the cart before the horse.
Yeah. I like the idea of including some sort of phase approach phrase in there. I don't know if there's a way of doing that in the next 2 seconds. But I don't think that would change the opposition of the Public Service Department or the Division of Fire Safety. So with that, why don't we do as Senator Bray suggests, a quick straw poll on this so that we can get on to a few minutes on the other items on the agenda.
Sure. And Kelly, you have our official list, or I don't know, Scott, if you have it in hand. I would just do this as a roll call. That way we'll know who's in, who's out. No harm, no foul. We'll just record it and go.
Okay, I have who's in attendance right now, so I'm happy to be the clerk.
Okay.
So Scott Campbell.
I would support.
Chris Bray.
Yes.
Kelly Wander, no. Mike DeRocha.
No.
Just in case.
Matt Sharp.
I think I abstain. It's just not, it's implied in the charge. It's not it's a duplicative to the charge.
Okay, Tim Perrin. Are you on, Tim? Or is it Karen? Horn? I'm not sure who's on for BGS. He dropped off and so did Karen. So we will move forward. Matt Bushy.
I agree, this is the charge, but yes.
Okay, Jim Bradley.
Yes, I support.
Richard Wooby has left. Ted, is Samantha still on the phone for VLCT? She dropped off. So no VLCT. Chris Campany.
Yes, with conditions, which we have an opportunity to submit, right?
Okay, Craig Peltier.
Yes.
Jennifer Collin.
Yes.
Peter Tucker.
No.
Okay, so we have of the members in attendance still, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 yeses and 3 nos and 1 abstention.
Okay. Kelly, could you call people and just, well, never mind. Let me think about that before we adjourn. So I think we're at a good place to pivot and go to the rest of the agenda. That true, Representative Campbell?
Looks like it to me.
Okay.
Let's do that. All right. So we had 4 items left on the agenda. Discuss the draft report sections and details with Zach. Next, steps to finalize a report to the legislature with Richard. Timeline and schedule for 2025. Working group with Zach and I guess, and then public comments. How do you think?
We
go through this. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I think we've sort of already covered a lot of suggestions for the report, which primarily came from Matt and the tables that were introduced. So I feel like we've sort of discussed that. What is, I believe, worth a few minutes is the topics for the 2025 Building Energy Code Working Group consideration, which, you know, I think there are a number of items that have been raised today that could be added to the list potentially that's included in the draft report.
So this is topics for discussion for next year, not necessarily the timeline and schedule, right? This is for okay.
Yeah.
They're at the end of the.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, the rest of the report structure is really, I'm sure you all saw, but just providing additional context on the recommendations that we just walked through. And so, I mean, if there are any major comments or questions or concerns about the structure, now is an appropriate time to voice those. Otherwise, I'd suggest we spend 5 minutes talking about this list as a way to kickstart the effort of the group for 2025.
Yeah, and
Can I just make a quick word about these two?
sure. Oh, yeah.
The other 2 tables that I submitted for inclusion are, they're labeled A1 and A2. Those numbers can be changed to fit into the report, but they are describing the current existing situation only. So I was imagining they would go into the introduction, the background section. Table A, I guess it's A1 that I labeled it, just has the diagrams of the building types across the top, and it explains what code is applicable to what building type. There was some comments in some previous meetings, which I agree with, that the last year's report was very long and a lot of people didn't even read it. And so that's why we want to keep this year's report short. I agree with that. I also think that a way to address that is to make information more kind of easily to digest and more kind of easy. So that's what this is. And I was
It's shared.
Oh, yeah, there we go. That's a slightly older version. But,
Okay.
but, you have I think the latest version was distributed to us. Our intent was that Mr. DeRocher and Matt Sharp and others would review these and just kind of vet them and correct them if there's a mistake. It should be, it's, the current existing condition. And then the second one is showing that the different entities involved. Here we go. PSD, DFS, OPR, and this does include EEUs on this chart to kind of lay the groundwork for our eventual
Now, obviously, sometimes you can find exceptions to the rule, but this is generally what.
Can you mute Michelle Farnham's mic? Keith, maybe?
So I would just say this chart does include EEUs because it lays the groundwork for the eventual findings, which may lay out the role of the EEUs in a future situation. But to understand all that, I think first it's helpful for the reader to understand what these entities are doing now. And so again, I would just invite Matt Sharp and others to make sure that this is correct. And then I think we could just include that.
I thought the tables were very useful, but we would want the entities involved to edit the language and make sure the language is reflective of that is actually happening. Kelly had a comment.
Yeah, I don't mind the first table, but this one is not correct, and I just don't feel like personally we have time, the department has time to really make it correct, and the EEU part is very one-sided. It's just Efficiency Vermont, and I feel like it'd be a lot of work to get it correct. I would rather leave this out until the next working group personally.
Okay, anybody else have any comments? I don't know. What's your pleasure, Senator Bray?
Well, the trick is, in part, there's a lot of work that goes into like creating. This is like a partial work product, and I'm trying to think of a way to not lose it. But if it has errors, then we don't want to put it into the report. As I'm thinking, everything in the report, even if there's controversy behind it, has been vetted, and it's as accurate as we know how to make it. So why don't we, for interested parties, we'll pass this along. But I think Kelly's point is well taken. If it's inaccurate, I don't think we want to, and we know there's inaccuracies. Let's not put it in as an appendix. Let's also not lose it. And this is all of us at this room are going to be the ones who will, I think, pretty much the same crew will be carrying the work forward.
I would be fine with including this as a task for the next working group to work on, but I just feel like there's not time to perfect it this time.
Well, there isn't an awful lot in the case of PSD.
So we are right, though. I mean, there's a bunch of blanks there, but I don't know whether.
It's just not, it's not just the departments isn't correct, and it's not fully filled out, but also the EUs is all about EVT.
Yeah.
I don't want to commit other EUs, especially when BGS isn't on the phone, to work on this and get it to the place that it would need to be correct.
All right. Well, it is too bad to lose the graphic though.
I can withdraw the document. We could put it next year.
Yeah.
Could we use the bad petri dish diagram in VBRA, but it needs to be updated. VBRA. They submitted.
Sure, but the circle's saying, yeah. I don't know, I guess from my own reaction, it was that wasn't as useful as this, in particular, the table that shows the jurisdiction of various codes and various building types.
VBRA agreed that the AIA document was approvable.
This was intended to replace that diagram.
Yes, exactly. We had a long talk about it.
Yeah.
Yes, you know.
Okay, well, it does seem like it's a little more complicated than we have
I withdraw.
time
Table A.
time to do right now.
We've run out of time.
Yeah. All right,
Craig has his hand up.
Craig.
I have a question, which since we're talking about charts, and it's probably for Scott, you and Senator Bray, would it be helpful to have in this report at the beginning of, the builders and remodelers comments, that I think Jim Bradley worked on, there's just a simple diagram of just what other states look like with a bunch of circles in our state, which I found somewhat compelling and very simple. Helpful. Just to have that in here to show what other states look like.
Update that, the two circle diagram.
Yeah.
That's fine.
I don't think it's not bad, so it's fine. If other people find that useful, it wasn't as useful to me, but sure.
I just think it's a stark record, because another thing here to me is that what we're ultimately, I don't know where we're going to get to, but we're going to have to create a new entity down the road that's going to be more analogous to that potentially is the pathway we might be headed to. So I just found it to be a simple visualization that some legislators might not have thought of before in that way, just how different we are from most states that Chris has brought up multiple times here and other people. So just a thought.
Matt Sharp has his hand up.
I would agree. I do like that circle chart, but the question I had was, or a clarification, is the table A3 going to be involved at all in this final report? Because I do have some suggestions on that and edits that we might need to make if that's going to be included.
No, I think that would be part of next year's discussion.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, that's my interpretation.
Yeah.
I think it's a great, I think it is a great table. I just think it has some things that need to be.
We said A3, which is that.
Oh, gosh. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
We have not had a chance to review that.
Yeah, that's going to have to be a next year conversation.
So I think that's one thing to put on this topics for 2025 is pick up review of AIA's draft tables.
Phased approach.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, that and these other figures that we've been and tables that we've been talking. I think those are great materials to kick off conversations for next year's working group.
Excellent.
Regarding charts, BVRA was also hoping that this report would include the 50 state comparison.
From last year's report?
Your students did, and I just.
I don't know why we can refer to the other report. I don't want to.
I think we're trying to keep this report as slim as possible, but I think certainly there should be a reference to the previous year's report as well.
In the appendix or something.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. For time, I mean, I'd suggest we just do public comment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just very briefly, we talked about the schedule for next year's group meetings, and we did.
Well, we talked about the schedule for this report, and
no, we haven't talked about it here.
Yes,
just we've been trying to think about also next year's working group meetings, and internally here we've talked about with Kelly and others starting these meetings earlier in the summer, perhaps even in June, and maybe going once a month through the summer, and then perhaps a couple of meetings in September and October or something like that.
So not during the session.
Not during the session.
Right. June, July, August, maybe a meeting a month.
Yeah. So I guess what we will do is pick out some dates and circulate them and see if we can gather a quorum for each of these meetings. All right.
But there was one point that BVRA had brought up at the very beginning of the meeting, and I was assuming it was slipping down into the 2025 topics. So they very definitely would like to include, consider moving contractor certification to fire safety.
Okay.
Okay, I'll add it to the list, Andy.
I believe that's in the list already.
Move authority of Arby's from PSD to DFS. Certifications, okay, I think it's just a little different.
Okay, yeah, okay, we can clarify, yeah.
All right, public comments, and any other public comments? Right, I think we've taken public comments during the course of the meeting, so. Is there anything else?
Do we want to just go over the timeline for the report?
Let's do that again.
Once
Make sure,
more?
yeah.
So Richard, I'm not sure how you feel about us turning that version that you've been marking up around to the group today
Today, I don't know about that.
or Monday.
Early next week.
Monday,
So,
just accepting.
Monday.
Okay, so we'll circulate that by the end of the day, Monday, and then would basically be looking for just any clarifications based on what was discussed today by close of business on the 6th, which is next Wednesday. And then
Including dissenting comments.
including dissenting comments. Thank you.
Nothing else going on.
Yeah.
We'll be waiting, or we'll be twiddling our thumbs for a while.
Here I was, I thought that was gonna be an important thing, now you've been sent.
I don't know anything for a while, I think.
Yeah, we'll put this all in an email when we send out the report, but then we would shoot to turn around to the final or, incorporating all the dissenting comments, any clarifications by the end of next week on the 8th. Any final clarifications in writing due close of business the 13th, which is Wednesday, and then that gives us basically 24 hours to finalize the report to submit to the committees.
Committee's on the 15th.
So we'll put that in writing when we send out the report.
okay.
Great.
Great. Any other final thoughts? Mr. Tucker?
So, based on the straw poll that we have on moving, RVs and CVs to the Department of Fire Safety, and that being a legislative activity, are you going to bring a bill forward to accomplish that in the next session?
Ooh, on the spot.
I haven't been reelected yet, so I.
Right.
I don't know. Oh, there's the- I'm learning how to be a politician. so.
Yeah.
Ask him on
Folks,
Wednesday.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Peter, the way you just framed that, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. You said the straw poll was about moving RB's certifications to.
No, AHJ.
Jurisdiction. Like,
Okay, because I was gonna say, that's not what I voted on. So I just wanted to be sure we were all talking about the same thing.
Right. I'm sure the next legislature is gonna be interested in reading this carefully and probably picking up the same conversations with the same group of people and digging in further.
Yes, I certainly hope so. All right.
And Scott and I hope to be part of that conversation.
Good luck on Tuesday. Indeed.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It's noon. Look at that. We finished on time.
Woo-hoo.
That's it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a miracle.
Thank y'all.
In some way, shape or form, I